Hello, my name is Hannah Richter. I am a lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of Hertfordshire, and the paper that I will sketch out now is titled The Politics of the Origin, S in brackets, Thinking, Power and Political Community Through the Ontological Turn. Now, what I want to do in this paper, no small feat, is aim to assess the ontological turn's contribution to political thought, more specifically how it allows us to think power and the political community. Now, what I need to say a bit more about before I start is how this paper understands the ontological turn in political theory, because it is a bit of a nebulous umbrella concept in the literature. There is a more narrow conception that attributes the ontological turn to a number of theories operating in the wake of the post-structuralist turn. Laclau and Marchard, some others as well. This is what we heard about from Sarah and Ben. Now, my approach is a bit broader and understands as ontological turn in political theory simply political theory's engagement with ontological origin, which is an extensive and messy field. So what the paper will firstly do is establish a structuring overview using Nietzsche's two different concepts of origin, Ursprung and Herkunft, to argue that there are two dimensions to this ontological turn in political theory. One dimension is the post-structuralist deconstruction of origin into a socio-politically situated and productive Herkunft, and on the other side, more recently, we find a materialist-realist speculative reopening of foundational Ursprung. And what I will argue is that both of those sides come with their specific achievements and advantages, but also their particular blind spots, so that I ultimately will conclude that the ontological turn should be sustained in its slightly incongruous two-dimensional nature. So, beginning with this analytical lens, if you wish, of Nietzsche's two concepts of origin, on the genealogy of morals, Nietzsche defines his own philosophical project as an investigation into Herkunft. The etymology of the German word suggests that Herkunft signals where something has come from, so it's an origin that has a socially situated moment of constitution, and also there is an unfolding socio-historical evolution that is intertwined with power struggles, and Nietzsche distinguishes this from a philosophical investigation into foundational origin as Ursprung, which he rejects because it is based on the misguided belief of a clearly identifiable ontological foundation behind the world, which in fact does nothing but conceal the historical contingency of any ontological claim, as well as how any particular version of the world such a claim can found ontologically inscribe certain political structures and hierarchies. Now, the post-structuralist side of ontological turn theory very directly draws on Nietzsche's genealogical investigation of Herkunft, most directly, obviously, Foucault, who uses Nietzsche for his own method of genealogy, which he describes in very analogous ways as intended to, quote, dispel the chimeras of the origin and reveal ontological claims as nothing but the metaphysical extension of the socio-historical situation in which they are produced. Here, ontological Ursprung recedes to a place of inevitable loss. It must remain absent from philosophical investigation. Now, the particular contribution of the post-structuralist politicization of ontological origin lies in the fact that it contextually relativizes the central constituents of how we understand politics, power, the political community, subjects. And because of that, at least I argue, avoids the judgment that Ben was talking about earlier. Now, this contextual relativization Foucault famously does for the concept of power, and in a slightly different vein, Agamben follows him there. Both outline theories of power where power is ontologically inessential and produced and shaped by societies and their knowledge relations. Turning to the dimension of community, post-structuralism here unpacks the political community not as an ontological category, but as relationally produced in nosi through the practical interaction of its constituents, in esposito through the apparatus that governs it. Without, again, going into detail, because this is a very sketchy overview, what is important to note here is that rather than making a strong ontological argument, both thinkers don't argue that political communities are based on a void, so an absent ground, capital A in a strong sense, but the ontological dimension is simply not what we need to understand in order to understand the origin and the functioning of community. So again, the ontological dimension is absent from investigation rather than ontologically classified as absent, which is an important difference. Because again, this judgment is precisely not being made here. In Noci's words, it is a groundless ground spanned by the accidental interrelations of singularities, Ungrund rather than Abgrund, which the community is based on. So what we find here is a turn to the inside rather than strong claims about the absence of an ontological ground. What Esposito adds here is that the absence of a communal essence of shared origin provides a space for political governance, because the biopolitical apparatus then offers such a communal identity or essence by demarcating a national or economic or racialized or all of those things community from an other it needs to be immunized from, which shows that any such investigation into a ontologically inessential but politically produced community always has a political action relevance to it. Now, over the past decade especially, this post-structuralist side of the ontological turn theory has been subject to increasing contestation from a multiplicity of approaches that I will here summarize as materialist-realist, including speculative realism, object-oriented ontology, and various new materialisms, which have substantial differences between them, but I argue share common grounds vis-a-vis the post-structuralist side. Now, firstly, the materialist-realist iteration of the ontological turn returns to a speculative engagement with the Ursprung of a shaping power, which is not identical with the expression we witness, but rather originates in a potentiality located outside of human perception and socio-cultural reception. In Tool Being, Graham Harman inverts Heidegger's ontological order to argue that objects are not mere placeholders for an inaccessible being. Creative capacity resides precisely in the free potentiality of the object yet to be made use of. Quoting Harman, beneath the plateau of visible hammers and bridges, there is the raw causal energy of these objects, each bumping up against the others with varying degrees of violence or softness. The new materialisms also frame their theoretical project as a theoretical rapprochement with material realism, positioned in opposition to the post-structuralist allergy to the real. This real is a complex entanglement of human and non-human entities. It is brought forth by a shaping power that is a differential multiplicity immanent to the inter and intra-relations of matter, and not the product of a thinking, conscious subject, not so much because here material creativity is explicitly posited as primary, but because even creative thought is shown to be rooted in the constitutive materiality of brain cells and neuronal networks. Its Ursprung is the thing power, the curious ability of inanimate things to animate, to act, to produce effects dramatic and subtle, following Jane Bennett. Now, turning to the community, as a consequence, the political community is rethought as populated by both human and non-human actors and actions. Their material shaping power forms an exteriority within, as Barad calls it, that causes the community to disintegrate into an ontological multiplicity. Socially mediated creative production is here only one possible way to give form to the creative co-constitution between human and non-human actors. Now, in this final section of the paper, I will, as I said, make a case for retaining both sides of ontological turn theory, because both come with their particular contributions, but also their particular reductionisms. Now, first reductionism of the post-structuralist side, here matter only becomes productive when enfolded in socio-epistemic relations. Bodies are recognized, for example, as productive, but only as secondary, only if this productivity is enfolded in epistemic relations. The productive primacy of the socio-epistemic domain reveals the Eurocentric underpinnings of post-structuralism. As Barad puts it, the asymmetrical faith we place in our access to representations over things is a historically and culturally contingent belief that is part of Western philosophy's legacy and not a logical necessity. Contingency is, in other words, here only recognized insofar as it is located on the side of culture. Amongst others, Viveros de Castro highlights that this is in fact a particular, contextually situated understanding of contingency. Other human communities view multiplicity and contingency as ontologically real and immediately present in the actors and forces that make up the world. In this sense, quoting Anne-Marie Moll, post-structuralist explorations of Herkunft broke away from a monopolistic version of truth, but didn't multiply reality, they multiplied the eyes of the beholders. Now, a second consequence of the post-structuralist primacy of socio-epistemic shaping power is that post-structuralist approaches struggle to offer satisfying accounts of political events that very obviously involve non-human forces. Agamben's February 2020 essay on the COVID-19 pandemic, in which he ponders that, quote, with terrorism exhausted as a cause for exceptional measures, the invention of an epidemic, end quote, constitutes a new mechanism for the exceptional production of power, fell so utterly flat and was so harshly criticized, because it just didn't measure up to the manifest reality of deaths and disrupted lives. Now, against this background, materialist-realist perspectives offers with approaches to grasp this manifest reality in a way that still acknowledges complexity in terms of emergence and shaping power, but without enforcing a narrow focus on how these events are received, framed and utilized by existing apparatuses of power, as it would be the case for post-structuralist approaches. Now, on the other hand, however, the post-structuralist side of ontological turn theory also has unique achievements to offer. On the one hand, and just very briefly, it can prevent materialist-realist thought from reifying material shaping power, which it tends to do because it ultimately retraces all shaping power to the ontological Ursprung of a material potentiality or self-differentiating force of materialization. This is a problem because in practice it is actually very difficult or virtually impossible to disentangle material and human productivity, so that in practice shaping power is co-constitutive and co-constituted, but all the way down. So if we take the case of the COVID-19 pandemic, of course the virus is an influential actor here, but so is our human, non-human relationships, illegal animal trade, wet markets, the capitalist exploitation of natural resources, which has provided fertile ground for pandemics and so forth, so that it is actually quite difficult to attribute deaths and disrupted lives here just to the Ursprung of the virus. Now, beyond this, I also suggest that post-structuralist thought can provide the materialist-realist turn with something else, with an awareness for and the theoretical tools to investigate its own rounds of emergence, its own rounds socio-epistemic conditionedness. Now, if we were to sketch out a speculative genealogy of the materialist-realist turn of the turn, what is its context of emergence? This is certainly a Foucauldian project, but I suggest that what can provide some content here, some ideas, is actually another post-structuralist, if you wish, theory, Luhmann's post-foundational systems theory, and particularly his book on ecological communication. The argument that he makes here is that, well, the conditions of emergence for the materialist-realist turn are highly complex late capitalist societies, with very specialized processes, which has made them somewhat fragile and susceptible to crisis, from economic crashes to the erosion of political trust in public spheres marked by high contingency, and at the same time, the combination of social specialization and complexity means that the extent to which citizens have insight to causes and ways to mitigate these crises is radically limited, leading to a general ontological insecurity, or as Luhmann calls it, anxiety. Now, while ecological material forces and changes are just one of the challenges that affect human societies in this context, for Luhmann, their specific appeal lies in the fact that they, at the same time, lend themselves to the production of a meta-narrative which reduces this ontological security. Zooming into a microbial or out to a planetary scale gives reality to these forces in a way that transcends cultural or political interpretations in its immediate accessibility. Within a context of general anxiety about the fragility of human life in the face of natural forces, materialist-realist frameworks transform the, quote, uncertainty of the situation into the certainty of anxiety. I think that nothing can illustrate this paradoxical provision of ontological security through the shared recognition of insecurity better than the COVID-19 pandemic, where the only constant to be reliably established in the face of rapidly unfolding events is the collectively shared anxiety induced by the former. Now, this was a very brief and very speculative sketch of the conditions that might have supported the emergence of the materialist-realist turn within ontological turn theory. But if we go with it for a second, materialist-realist speculation reflects a socially situated, epistemologically mediated, and selective engagement with the challenges faced by contemporary capitalist societies. This does by no means invalidate its claims and insights, which are valuable as shown before, but it also serves as a reminder not to readily naturalize the turn to materiality as a philosophical progress beyond the dead end of post-structuralism, so that one could say that maybe if the ontological turn in political theory is to survive within the history of ideas in its analytically most powerful and politically most biting form, it should be sustained as a Janus-faced creature with those two faces or two sides. Thank you for listening.